This is the Grow Your Clinic podcast from Clinic Mastery. We help progressive health professionals to lead inspired teams, transform client experiences, and build clinics for good. Now, it's time to grow your clinic.
Actually, interestingly, Catherine, so many people are listening to more podcasts as we're in COVID season, and really walking is about the only exercise we're allowed to do. But nonetheless, we'll continue. So join the dots for us. You didn't mention growing up wanting to be a conflict resolution expert as a teenager at high school. I'm sure there was some definite sporting achievements along the path, but connect the dots from the young tacker through to netball and now into HR. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, I think I was very lucky to have an introduction to sport at an early age and be involved in that to a very high elite level, because I became exposed to some extremely good sports coaches who were also very good people coaches as well, and showed fantastic leadership, very good at inspiring other people and wanting to help others achieve. And so I learned a lot from that. But I was also very involved in music. So I was exposed to people who were always interested in what they're doing, passionate, and really beautiful cohort of people wanting to help others achieve. And I really loved the art of teaching. I became a sports coach as well, and I moved that aspect of coaching into the work that I was doing. So I actually loved being a teacher, but I was also really interested in leadership and held many leadership roles within the school setting from a very early period of my employment. But after spending so much of my life in education as a student and then a teacher, I decided I wanted to learn more about leadership in business, because the education setting didn't really see themselves as a business, and they didn't really work to a business model and manage and lead people. And I felt we could really get a lot more value out of our staff, our colleagues, if we showed interest in them, rather than just kept throwing sort of process and changes in pedagogy at them and all the new administrative tasks they all had to take on. And so I felt that teaching was really highly undervalued, both inside and outside of education. And so to be able to transition out of education, I needed extra qualifications. And in racking my brains to think, well, where do I go from here? What's my next career? I realised that as a teacher, as a leader, as a sports coach, I was always helping to resolve conflict. And so when I spied a Master of Conflict Resolution as a university course, I went, yep, I've been doing that pretty much all my life. So I did that, and along the way also became an accredited mediator and workplace investigator. And that led to my first employment outside of education with a HR consultancy business, doing conflict resolution training, mediation and investigations for their clients. And then I completed a Master of Workplace and Employment Law and set up my own consultancy business, which I've been running now for 10 years. And we have a fantastic, successful and vibrant business. I just love the opportunity to still coach and still teach through the work that I do. So I deliver a lot of training programs to organisations around conflict resolution, but also leadership, performance management, communication. And even when I'm conducting mediations, I find that I'm still performing in a conflict and communication coaching with parties. I'm still teaching them about how to have more effective interactions in the workplace. And then I get my science kick, because doing workplace investigations is actually very detailed, and I've got to join dots and research and investigate, and then I've got to write a really thorough and detailed report, which reminds me of all those science reports we used to have to write after our experiments. So I'm lucky I've been able to tie together a lot of things that I love doing within my current role.
That's amazing. It's so much more broader than, I guess, the average perception of conflict resolution. So I'm interested. Let's get some definitions down. Let's get us all on the same page. What is conflict resolution?
Conflict resolution for me is being able to really identify the conflict most times people aren't very good at expressing what their concerns are.
Right.
And mostly we don't take the time to understand their concerns. We listen, but we don't really listen, and we overlay our own assumptions onto what that person is saying. And often it can appear that what they're concerned about is really quite trivial. We can have those reactions of, oh, come on, grow up, be mature, you're acting like a child. All of those sorts of thoughts can come into play when we're not really focused on being concerned for the person and the distress they're going through and why it's important and valid to them.
I was going to say, I think what I'm hearing is there's a lot of empathy and listening involved in conflict resolution. And even just as you're talking, that language of conflict resolution is in contrast to what I often hear around managing conflict. We don't necessarily want to manage it. We want to resolve it, right?
That's right. Well, I think it has two aspects. One is that when we say we want to resolve it, people tend to want to resolve it to their satisfaction or to what they think should happen rather than what the parties involved in the conflict are looking for. Right. And often we're very uncomfortable with conflict. People don't like what they call confrontation. They don't want to talk about things necessarily and confront each other with the concerns. And when they do, they're in a state of discomfort. They don't know how to have that deeper level conversation, and they rush through it and dismiss things, and so only superficially address the conflict and therefore think it's resolved, but it's not. And what I see is that it just harbours more resentment and more conflict, and it escalates and grows. So there's a real skill in resolving conflict, and then there's another skill in managing the culture so that positive conflict occurs, not negative conflict. I'm really quite fine with there being conflict in a business, because if there wasn't, your business would be dead.
Yeah, that resonates. We love Pat Lencioni here at Clinic Mastery, and the 5 dysfunctions of a team he refers to robust, healthy conflict being a key pillar of a functional workplace. And I think the way you're describing how people might sometimes approach conflict resolution and management will resonate with health professionals. Typically, we care so much in Kim Scott's language of radical candor. We're ruinously empathetic, and so we avoid conflict because we're big softies often, and head in the sand seems to work for a short period, but rarely for a long period. And like you said, managing leadership really is conflict management. They are one and the same. So I'm interested. What mistakes do you see leaders make when it comes to dealing with a conflict situation in a workplace?
A couple of different types of if we term them as mistakes. One is not being able to empathise or recognise or see from the other person's perspective why this is a concern for them. Mm-hmm. It's not a concern for me personally, therefore I can't see why it would be a concern for you. And you must have lower levels of resilience. There must be something wrong with you. And so it's not worth my time. It's not worth the amount of energy you're wanting me to put into this. And in fact, when most people come forward with their conflict, it's already been simmering for quite a while. And by the time I make a decision to declare that concern and approach someone to help me resolve it, I'm quite emotional about it and can come across as quite needy and overly emotional, not logical, and also wanting to sort of suck on your energy and pull on you to help me. And most people shy away from wanting to have that energy taken out of them, and also don't know what to do when somebody's presenting as that emotional to them. If they'd come to me in a logical state, we could probably have a rational conversation and resolve it fairly quickly. Yeah. So there's a lack of skill there in about how to listen to somebody and transition them through that emotional phase into a more logical phase where we can start to have a logical conversation which is going to get us to some better outcomes.
I love it. Catherine, do you think there's a difference in conflict in a smaller workplace versus a large corporate office? I know most health clinics are really close quarters, often teams up to about 20-ish. Of course, there's larger, but it might even be smaller, and we're in confined spaces. We're in each other's pockets all the time. Is that different to what maybe is more commonly seen as office or corporate culture?
Yes, I think you've pointed out a very good factor. Look, the basis of conflict is always the same, but how it plays out is quite different in a small business because, like you're saying, you are in close confines. From my perspective, what I've seen, more than professional relationships, they start to drift into being personal relationships. And once we get into that personal level of relationship in a workplace, we are actually expecting more of each other, and we start to be more opinionated about each other. And it doesn't take much for someone to do something which we are surprised at, that we didn't think a friend would do that. And if that was me, I wouldn't have done that. So why did they do that? We can't avoid that person. It makes it very difficult because everybody in the clinic's friends with each other. So when I start to offload to somebody else in the clinic, very quickly there can become fragments. You can start to have small divisions happening in the clinic. And whereas in a larger office that can happen, but it's not as noticeable. There's always somebody else you can go and talk to. Or there are other processes in place like, EAP and HR and other managers, whereas in a small business, you're sort of left to try and manage these things on your own.
And you're often one of the team as well as being the leader. You're one of the therapists as well as the boss. And I'm interested, we brushed over it at the top, but you've played sport at a fairly high elite level. Is there any correlation between those team dynamics in a professional sports setting compared to a team setting in a workplace?
Oh, yes, I think so. Very, very, very much. In a sports setting, it's the coach, and it's how the coach develops each of those individuals to have their own sets of skills and abilities, but then how the coach brings all of them together to work as a team and to respect each individual, but respect that we work together as a team and we achieve these outcomes as a team. And there's a lot of skill there in doing that, in the way that we harmonise people to work together to achieve that outcome, invest in each person as individuals so that they're developing, give each person attention, like they have their own little development program, which a coach will do with you, but then also train everybody together as a team. And in a team situation, you spend a lot of time training and developing your skills, and then you apply it in a very short period, like in a game. And yet we walk into a workplace and just expect everybody to already have the skills and already apply them all the time without dedicating a decent amount of time to coaching, training, developing. It's almost like you walk in through the front door and it's game time all the time.
So what I'm hearing is we as leaders, it's our responsibility and privilege to be able to train our team in communication and resilience and conflict management if and when it arises before the proverbial hits the fan, right?
You are correct. It's all about prevention, really. And in the leadership training that I do, I talk about how important it is to build professional rapport with your staff early, because we know that when you have trust with somebody, you can say one thing to that person and you may not get it right, but they trust you and they'll take it with the genuine intent that you meant to deliver it with. But if this person that I don't trust says exactly the same thing, I actually see it in a different light and it creates tension and that conflict starts to grow. So it's so important for our leaders to build professional trust, professional rapport with each of their staff, and set the tone for this professionalism within our clinic. Yes, we want a friendly place, we want a fairly relaxed place, but we still all should have professional boundaries and work together as professionals. Because my belief is that once we actually lower those boundaries of professionalism, those non-professional behaviours creep in very quickly, and we won't notice until something happens and then we've realised, hang on, we've let this slip too far.
It's interesting, and I love that your organisation has the workplace conflict resolution, but also the harmony solutions. And for me, that's much more towards positive. I love that preventative, positive type approach. So we're going to get into some proactive culture stuff to round out some of that conflict. In what circumstances is an external assistance useful? So in what place is someone like yourself or a third party or a mediator, in what circumstances is that really useful versus just dealing with it in-house, person to person?
Well, most organisations that I've been involved with have actually tried to do the mediation themselves, and it's not been successful. It's actually escalated matters, and then they've had to bring us in to mediate again and resolve things again. I think what might be missing from an internal perspective is time and that genuine intent to really want to understand the other person and help assist them. And there is a skill in preparing people to come together for that conversation, because if we don't prepare them correctly with what the intent of that conversation is going to be, most people can come into a mediation wanting to point blame and work out who's right or wrong and argue about situations. And so there's a skill there in terms of letting people have a voice, but also putting the focus on moving forward. What are the outcomes we do want, and how are we going to prevent these situations from occurring again?
Yeah, so we can't change the past, but we can move forward. That's
right, whereas most conversations people have, they're focused in the past. And it certainly has a place, because we need to go back there to relay how we felt and what's got us to this point. But if we harbour on the past, it will just become an argument of he said, she said, and pointing fingers. And then there is no resolution from that, unless you want to go through an investigation and have a fact-finding mission of what actually did happen, which is sometimes often necessary. So I see from the point of view of there perhaps being a lack of skill, maybe a reason to bring in an external party to help resolve a situation. It could also be that the person who's responsible for helping to resolve the situation is just too close to the situation, is perhaps perceived to be friends by both persons and would feel uncomfortable themselves doing it, or the two people in conflict might feel that person is biased and won't manage the process very well. Or maybe they just don't have the time. We know these clinic owners and these leaders are extremely busy people, so they may want to outsource. I pay an accountant to be my accountant because I recognise the skills that they have. I pay my business coach to be my business coach. I recognise their skills. And so I see nothing wrong with businesses recognising the skills of other professionals and being clever enough about when to bring them in and support the business, because there are expedient results. We pay an accountant a lot of money, but they know what they're doing and they deliver the job quickly. Similar sort of aspect here.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And workplace relations and industrial relations, it's quite heavily geared towards the employees in a lot of circumstances. So getting it right has some real implications legally, financially, etc. down the track, right?
You're right. And doing these processes, the business leader needs to be really careful that they're saying the right thing and doing the right thing, because inadvertently they could actually create more of a litigious situation than would have existed previously. And most people don't want to follow a litigious pathway. Most people, I find, are really genuinely wanting to resolve their issues and have good workplace relationships, but sometimes they just feel really forced to go down those pathways. I also wanted to point out that in terms of conflict resolution and mediation, what I also aim for and have my staff aim for as well is teaching people these skills to have these conflict resolution discussions between themselves and to do it early and promptly as the situation occurs, and not harbour on it and wait to see if, it was just a bad day and maybe time will heal things and we'll wait and see. Because unless the conflict is addressed promptly and resolved promptly, there's always that little bit of resentment harbouring in the background, and it doesn't take much for that to escalate and grow. So part of our approach is actually teaching staff to be able to have these conversations with each other when they need to and before conflict happens, so that we keep that harmonious workplace and that professional culture going every day. You know, so I think that might be another good reason to bring in a specialist in this area, not just to resolve that situation, but to give staff better skills and more skills to be able to do that without the third person being involved.
Yeah, time rarely heals all wounds, right?
Correct.
And on the third party thing, I think what you just touched on and what I'm hearing you've alluded to there is sometimes ideal to have a third party help in the proactive or the preventative approaches rather than having to have someone come in a conflict resolution reactive environment. I know in our clinic, we often say that we'll often get third party presenters, speakers, consultants come in and present for our team at our culture days, because when I say it, it's coming from dad, in inverted commas, dad. But to have someone else say it, it carries so much more gravitas sometimes, right?
Yeah, you're right. I like what you're saying there. People like a variety of experiences, to hear different voices. And we might be saying the same thing, but somebody else will come in and say it just slightly differently, and it will resonate with some of your staff, slightly different angle, different words, different phrases. And that is sometimes our role in the work we do with Workplace Harmony Solutions, is actually to facilitate a team meeting to set a safe meeting space where people can be honest and frank and say what's causing them trouble, what they would like to see improve within the workplace culture. And it becomes an opportunity to draw like a line in the sand and for everybody to acknowledge, well, maybe things haven't been as good as, for me, culture can always be improved. It's a journey, not a destination, isn't it? So
love it.
The really proactive organisations, the ones who get the trainers, the facilitators in, have these little workshops periodically to just tune up and fine tune. But, if we've missed that chance and the engine's almost not working at all, it still doesn't matter. Bring somebody in to help reset the agenda and reset the culture. Let's make some new agreements about how we'll all work with each other and interact with each other. Here's our line in the sand. Let's all move forward together. Works really well. Yeah.
So let's move towards that harmony side of things. That gets me excited. So tell me, in your words, what is workplace harmony?
Great question. Yes. Workplace harmony, I believe, is a culture in which we can have robust and frank but constructive discussions with each person, and not just discussions, any type of communication or interaction. There is no fear, there's no hesitancy, there's transparency, and there's a high level of trust. And that's not because we're trying to be nice with each other. I often see that as a downfall in organisations where people are trying to be nice. And when we're nice, we tend to avoid what we might think are the difficult things. But really, in avoiding it, it actually makes the situation worse and even harder to address. So workplace harmony is not about having a nice workplace.
It's not ping pong tables and bean bags and.
Well, it could be, but I don't think it's necessary. That we may offer our staff those opportunities for a bit of rest and downtime, and we may organise social occasions for us to have a little bit of social conversation and build rapport. But it really is about knowing. Well, it's about having clarity, I think, and agreement on what is actually expected of each person and what is expected of their contribution to the culture and the business, and what understanding do we have of professionalism. And if everybody's on the same page with our expectations, we've got clarity about our roles and responsibilities, and we have somebody in charge. When I say in charge, I do mean that, a leader who is prepared to hold people to account for their behaviours and their performance and is present, and people can see that they're present, then they set the example and they hold us all to account to deliver on that same example. I think we've got workplace harmony.
Yeah, I like that. I think you mentioned there around expectations and clarity and accountability. Sometimes those things seem to carry maybe a negative connotation, but what you're saying is in the right environment, those things are quite liberating and do create a lot of harmony. Is that right?
Yes, because without them, they actually create a lot of conflict in their absence.
Exactly, right?
Yes, yeah.
Especially if we haven't been trained much, or we've stumbled into leadership, or maybe our clinic has grown beyond what we'd planned, we feel like imposing restrictions, expectations, guidelines is a culture killer. But what you're saying is it creates certainty and therefore, a healthy place for people to thrive, right?
Correct. We tend to have this assumption that people should know how to behave and that people should know what's expected of them, and people don't.
Right. They're only human, right?
So, yeah. And we only know that from our own perspective, and everybody's perspective and experiences bringing us to the same point in time are different. So we don't have clarity on what the business line is. We will just do what we think is right. I think most people do what they think is right. They're trying to do the right thing.
Sure.
It's just that we're all coming from slightly different angles, and then there's tension, and we don't often take time to try to understand each other very well. We think that the world operates through the way we see it, and if somebody operates differently, there must be something wrong with them, or they must be doing it intentionally. We're very quick to jump to having negative opinions about other people, and I don't know whether that's just this day and age where you can now vote people off a show and you can type in social media any negative comment you want to make about, we've become a very judgmental and opinionated society, I think. And, we don't go to work to be able to elaborate on our own opinions and judgments. We're there to do a professional job and give our professional opinion and contribute our professional experience. So sometimes there's a blurring of those expectations and boundaries when we're going to work, I think.
So I'm personally curious, and I know our listeners will be too, when you think about workplaces that are really harmonious, that have fantastic culture, they're really proactive, especially in the small to medium business world, when you think about those high-performance clinics or high-performance business workplaces, what are some of the traits that they have? What are some of the things that they do that we can perhaps think about emulating?
They have a clear code of conduct, a clear expectation for conduct, both professionally in how we're expected to communicate and interact with each other and our customers. Mm-hmm. And they're held account to it very quickly. Science. No, very promptly. And there are great ways. I really don't think that we're given many skills or experience in how to be given feedback, how to give feedback. And therefore, because there's a lack of giving feedback, we also don't have very good skills in receiving feedback. And so we're often frightened to give it because we're worried the other person will be upset, take it negatively. But in my experience, where I see that being done regularly and it being done well, it's well received. So there's an aspect there about harmony of actually saying more and doing more rather than avoiding those difficult conversations.
And it sounds like you're alluding to kind of almost real-time feedback, and not the more time passes, the more complex situations get. So a bit of a curly one. We're in the midst of COVID and we're working remotely a lot of the times, or even pre-COVID. There's multi-site clinics, and maybe it's hard to be present and hard to have that real-time conversation. So how can we as leaders best navigate a digital environment where we're working remotely or across multi-site?
I think now more than ever, it's really important for leaders to be developing one-to-one relationships with staff and creating opportunities for multiple, metaphorically speaking, touch points.
Right.
To be having those conversations, checking in on how people are doing, following up on, their work, how they're coping, but, how are they doing with that? What are they doing? Giving them feedback regularly around that. I often find that managers can be very quick to accept the information that their staff give them. So when I can ask you, how's your work going? And you say, yeah, great. And I say, well, did you follow up on this? And they go, yeah. There's probably 2 or 3 other questions that need to be asked to really dig a little bit deeper, because we know that people only tell us what they want to tell us. And the role of the manager is to actually make sure that everything's being done properly, and it's not about a lack of trust. It's just about following through on due process. And if the staff member has followed through on every step of the process, then they have no problem with elaborating on that and declaring that. So these conversations, I think, can be developed to be had regularly and to be held in depth. It doesn't take very long. Also developing ways to build team experiences virtually, through morning teas and those virtual morning teas and those sorts of things. It's leadership is a lot about stakeholder development, stakeholder relationships as well.
I love that. I love what you're saying around real time, around the rhythms of touching base and holding people accountable is genuinely in their best interest. If we're all as committed as we say we are to our ideals of client experiences and customer service, then it is incumbent on us as leaders to hold people to that standard that they've prior agreed to, right?
Exactly. Interestingly, maybe they had a prior agreement.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is where I'm saying I think there should be explicit understanding and agreement about what my role is, what your expectations of my role are, what you're expecting me to achieve, what level of detail of conversation, how much feedback you're wanting me to give you about what I've done and where I'm up to, all those sorts of things. How do I resolve issues when I have them? We could have a culture where people will be prepared to speak up genuinely early rather than harbour on things. Let's have a culture where we can put things out on the table and discuss them in the best interests of the business and in the best interests of all of us as a team.
So on culture and code of conduct, which you've mentioned, and which is really agreed behaviours, what role is there for collaboration and contribution from the team versus a top-down approach?
For designing their workplace culture and their code of conduct? Very much so. That's what we do, is we facilitate those team meetings where we talk about what sort of culture would you like. Right. And we don't just talk about culture in terms of behaviour and how people communicate with each other, but we also even delve into roles and expectations of roles and clarity of roles. I love your idea about this coming from the team because they're at the coalface. They know how processes work best. They know how a clinic can operate really well. And let's hear from them. They can sort out a lot of things in relation to processes, systems, improving customer experiences, and they also know what culture they want. And when you actually discuss as a group, you'll find out they actually want the same thing. And then when you ask them, how do we actually achieve this, they come up with great ideas, and then they're their ideas, they agree on them, and they usually tend to follow them.
Right, if it's their idea, they're going to own it a lot more than when the boss tells them to do this or that. Yeah. I love it. If you think about the clinic owner that maybe is stretched, they're leading a team of, say, 15 or 16 people themselves, which is quite a significant team to lead, and they're really struggling to, they've got a happy workplace, but maybe there's a little bit of tension or there's behaviours that have been excused in the past. If you think about that clinic owner, what are some quick things that they could implement over the coming weeks that might help to turn their workplace to a more harmonious environment?
Great question. One of the things I see with small businesses is they lack policies. And while we don't want to, have something written on a piece of paper and bandied around like a sword and discipline people with it, people do need to know and have clear expectations. So I think one of the quickest, easiest things to do is to have a code of conduct and develop it. And you could, if you wanted to do this straight away, implement a draft one and then say, 2 weeks, whatever time, let's have a team meeting and discuss this and design one that we all really want. But here's a draft one to give you an example of the sorts of things I think we should be looking for in terms of our behaviour and how we interact with each other.
Get the whiteboard out or the butcher's paper and build it together.
Yeah, that'd be great. So let's start with having a code of conduct, and then that can set the pathway for developing grievance handling processes, performance management documents and those sorts of things. I think they can be really helpful as a starting point for everyone to have the same understanding, and then you bring it alive through this healthy workplace culture.
Amazing. That's been really insightful. I've learned plenty along this journey, and no doubt our listeners have as well. Catherine, if people wanted to get in touch with you, check out your company's Workplace Harmony Solutions and Conflict Resolution, what's the best way for them to get in touch or to read more?
Great. Well, if they Google Workplace Conflict Resolution, they're going to find our business name. I think will probably come up first in that SEO engine search, which is fantastic. So going through the internet, I think, would be the best way to search for Workplace Harmony Solutions or Workplace Conflict Resolution.
Perfect. And listeners, will grab the direct links and any social profiles as well so that you can find them. They'll be over at clinicmastery.com/podcast, where all of the usual show notes and links live. Catherine Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Grow Your Clinic podcast.
Thank you, Jack. I've had a great time talking with you. Good luck to all of your listeners.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope you got plenty out of that. If you have any feedback, please do get in touch via the reviews, ratings, or you can email me, jack@clinicmastery.com. Head over to our website to grab all the show notes. You can do the Assess Your Clinic scorecard and all of the other free resources over there. And I can't wait to bring you another episode of the Grow Your Clinic podcast again really soon. Bye for now.
Thanks for tuning in to the Grow Your Clinic podcast. To find out more about past episodes or how we can help you, head to www.clinicmastery.com/podcast. And please remember to rate and review us on your podcast player of choice. See you on the next episode.